on YouTube. Good. So it is a pleasure and a privilege to be before the Republicans named for my favorite president ever, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Although Trump too is catching up. Really, really amazing stuff. So I'm going to start with my intent. This is a very ambitious speech in terms of what I want to cover. I want to do a survey of Iranian history and Islamic history as pertains to that as background to the current events. And I'm going to start with a few basic things. First off, we think in the West about war and peace as distinct things. Oh, actually, I should start with my tie. This is a tie for the Shahan Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, in other words, the Shah of Iran. This is the Imperial Iranian flag, which was overthrown when the Shah was overthrown in 1979. I first saw this in the United States with some Iranian exile students in Portland, Maine. They had make flags of where you're from because we had so many immigrants there, and, God, I think legal. And they had the Iranian flag with the lion and the sun, which is something I hadn't seen since the 70s. So I got one, and whenever I'm talking about Iran, I wear the imperial flag. This is not the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which we've been dealing with since 1979. In the West, we developed a tradition of war and peace as distinct things. This is not true in Asia. Not in West Asia, not in South Asia, not in East Asia. Instead of a distinct period of war and peace, you have low-grade war and high-grade war. Low-grade war is raiding by barbarians. High-grade war is war between nations or major civil wars. So when we think of peace, we think of a state that is not involving overt attacks on other countries and not having them attack you. But that is a product of Western civilization, and particularly in the modern age. So when we think of peace, it is simply not a part of the tradition of the Iranians or of anyone who comes from an Asian tradition to play nice in peacetime. It's just a question of at what level will the conflict be played out. Number two, in the West, particularly in the United States, we do not have a culture of dickering, of bartering, of bargaining so that one person loses and the other person wins. I mean, yeah, there are a few people who do that, but our culture, steeped in Christianity for 2,000 years, prefers to have a reasonable negotiation where both sides win, or where both sides get something out of the compromise. This is not the way it is in the Middle East. If you're a tourist who goes to the Middle East and you pay sticker price, they're going to laugh at you. It is expected that you will barter, that you will bargain, that you will dicker, that you will try to buy whatever you want to buy at the lowest possible price by any means necessary, trickery, emotional manipulation, whatever. Imagine it going to the grocery store is like going to a car salesman. That level of stress. And so when even Israel has this as part of its tradition. So one of the reasons why, after agreeing to an amazing ceasefire, there was last-minute attacking is because of this Asiatic tradition where you try to get the most from the deal at the expense of the other party, and it really is not part of the Christian tradition. It's not part of what we would call fair dealing, but it is the way things have been done in the Middle East since the first civilizations. The third thing is, let me glance at my notes. You don't calculate the risk in the Middle East. You do what you think is right, inshallah. Inshallah is an Arab term. It means God willing. No Muslim, and frankly, this is part of the Christian and Jewish traditions as well, is going to say anything definitive about the future. We'll meet for lunch or for breakfast at the Pachyderms on Friday. Inshallah, God willing. That gives to God his righteous authority to determine the future. We have our plans, but in the end, God's will prevail. Now, how does this play out in history? Well, there were two events in ancient Jewish history that actually affect Islam very much, and the enemies of Israel as much as Israel itself. The first happened about 100 years before Christ. Israel is under the authority of a Greek king named Antiochus, and Antiochus wants to turn the Jews into worshipers of the Olympian gods. So Antiochus, this is the story of the Maccabees. Antiochus restricts Jewish worship and in a really obnoxious way tries to take the most at-heart identity that Jews have, which is they are the followers of the one God. The Lord is God, the Lord is one, King of the universe. And so the Maccabees rise up against an empire that has an imperial budget, a navy, armies, courts, jails, and they basically have the will of God. They believe that God is on their side. And they fight. Now, any rational calculation of the risk of fighting Antiochus's empire would say, no, you don't fight that with a bunch of mountain boys, with a bunch of guerrillas. But if God is with us, who can stand against us? And in the Middle East, this is true for Jew as well as Muslim. In the Middle East, this is true for Persian, Arab, and Hebrew. You do what you think God wants you to do, come what may. You don't follow the Western rationalist idea of calculating the risk, of weighing the consequence. You do what you think God wants. So this is something that has baffled Westerners when dealing with the Middle East for generations. They do things that don't make sense to us because there's no rational way they're going to defeat the British Empire when it was at its height, or the United States when we are at our height. There's no rational path to victory, but it's not about rationalism. If we place ourselves in the path of history, God's will be done. That's it. That's where the calculation stops. And that is why peace in the Middle East is so very difficult. You dicker until they bleed, but you also don't follow a rational approach. You instead do what you believe God wants, come what may. And this actually plays out in one of the more famous events in Jewish history. This is about 80, 90 years after, well, about 80 years after Christ. You have the story of the Jewish War, where the Jews rise up against the Roman Empire. And the Jews that lead this struggle are zealots. They're anti-Roman Jewish terrorists. And the zealots actually kicked the Romans out of Judea for a while. But the Romans aren't going to stay kicked out. The Romans aren't Greeks, and the emperors are not Antiochus. So the Roman legions come back in from Syria, and they come back in from Egypt, and they are going to crush the Israelites, the Jews, in a pincer movement from attacks north and south. This is the war where Jerusalem is completely destroyed. There are several moments in Jesus' ministry where he talks about, you see this, all of this, it's going to be gone. And he's not just talking about the apocalypse, he's talking about what actually literally happens to the city of Jerusalem around him, which is utterly destroyed by Vespasian, the Roman general who will become emperor. The temple of God that Solomon built, and it was rebuilt after the Babylonian captivity, is also destroyed. And when this temple is destroyed, the only thing that's left is the western foundational wall, and that is the most sacred place to Jewish people on earth, the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Well, the surviving terrorists go to a plateau, a mesa, called Masada, overlooking the Dead Sea. Herod the Great had built a fortress there. There was food and water there for years. And the Romans invested Masada, and they took a few years to build a giant ramp to go up into Masada to defeat the final holdouts, the bitter enders, the terrorists, the zealots. Well, the night before the attack, the night before the Romans are going to come up through their siege tower over the wall, the leader of the zealots calls his people together, men, women, children, and says, tomorrow they're coming. And it could be a normal battle where we are defeated And if this happens, some of us will be captured alive and made slaves. Our women will be molested and made slaves. Our children will be raised to eat pork and to hate God. Or we could do something that will, in our defiance, echo through the ages. And what they all do, mothers do this to their children, husbands do this to their wives, or people do this to themselves, is they slice their throat at the carotid artery and bleed out very, very quickly. It is a mass suicide of every man, woman, and child. And combat veterans of the Roman legions cross into Masada Fortress the next morning, and they lose their lunch because they didn't expect this. They've seen battlefields. But to see entire families who have chosen death rather than surrender. And so this tradition of fighting to the end and of spitting defiance in the eye of your enemy is also part of the Middle Eastern tradition. In other words, we children of the West, touched by Christ's gentle approach, do not understand how flinty, how steely Muslims and Jews and others who come from the Middle East are when it comes to war, when it comes to bargaining, when it comes to even whether or not we're going to have anything that we would recognize as peace. And that is the first misunderstanding that people can have. Now, basics of Iran itself. Iran basically is a giant parallelogram. It's a peninsula surrounded, in effect, by mountains. The Caspian Sea is to the north, the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea are to the south, but the coastlines are not populated. There are problems. Basically, they're narrow strips with mountains. And so the Iranians are a land-oriented people. There are no great rivers that flow through Iran. The Iranian people are the Aryans, that group of Indo-European language speakers that stretched from what is today northern India and Pakistan all the way to the British Isles. The Indo-European Aryan group, Hitler and his people were wrong. Aryans are not merely Germanic. The Aryan ethnic group and the Aryan language group and the Aryan cultural group started out near Iran, started out in the Caucasus and the mountains near western and northern Iran. And they were horse people. Just as the Egyptians and the Greeks became oriented towards water travel, river and sea, the Persians became oriented towards land travel, and they are some of the first people that employed horses in warfare, not with chariots. I mean, the horses were too small to ride on into battle, but the Iranians were among the first to love that. They were among the first to breed horses large enough for small men to ride into battle. So, the first gift that Iran gives to the world, Iran and Persia are the same thing. Iran means land of the Aryans. Persia is what Greeks and Westerners have tended to call it, is a religion that we don't know much about called Zoroastrianism, Persian dualism. This is the traditional religion of Iran until the Islamic faith takes over in the 700s AD. And what Zoroastrianism posits is not many gods, like the Greeks or the Vikings, and not one god, like Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Two gods. Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light, who comes from a universe of light and good and order and peace and joy. And Ahriman, the Dark Lord, evil, the antithesis of Ahura Mazda. Ahriman from a universe of absolute decay, darkness, chaos, suffering. And something happened at the beginning, according to Prophet Zoroaster, that the universe of light and darkness, like matter and antimatter, equal and opposite particles, come together and boom, I shouldn't do that among people who might have heart conditions. I'm sorry, I'm used to dealing with high school students. But an explosion erupts. And we're living inside that explosion. The explosion is matter meets antimatter, ultimate light meets ultimate darkness. And we're inside this living explosion. Every human being, every animal, every plant, every place on Earth, every star in the cosmos, it's all part of this ongoing explosion. But an explosion is inherently an unstable thing. The universe will either settle out into perfect light or utter darkness. heaven or hell. What, according to Zoroaster, will determine this is human choice. Every human choice has a moral component. So do you want fries on that, or with that, actually has a moral component, according to something. And sooner or later, a critical mass of human choices will tilt the universe into eternal light or everlasting darkness. And this is the religion that unifies the Persian people in ancient times. And it has an influence on monotheism. There are Christians who believe that the devil is a fit opponent of God. That's ludicrous. Godzilla versus Bambi is a fairer contest than that of God versus Satan, because Satan is an angel of God fallen. He's a creature of God. He is a created being. Satan and evil messes with us. We're mortals. But God doesn't have a single thing to worry about. The Bible has a happy ending. Eternal light is promised. But there are many people who approach monotheism, I'm talking Jews, Christians, and Muslims, who give such power to evil, as if evil could challenge God and take him off of his eternal throne. No. Monotheism, one God. Yep, there are rebels. Misery loves company. Rebels like to ensnare people. The word diabolos, which is Satan's name in Greek, means confusion, utter confusion, confusion through and through. And the power of evil is to confuse people and take them off the righteous path. But this idea of an equality or a balance of power between God and the devil comes straight out of this Zoroastrian Persian religion, where there are two equal gods. Now, in ancient times, the Persians were the first world empire. They established an empire that stretches from Afghanistan's border all the way to northern Greece. They have Egypt, they have Mesopotamia, they have every major ancient civilization in that part of the world, including a bunch of Greeks in western Turkey called Ionian Greeks. In the 490s BC, the Greeks in Ionia rebel against the Persian Empire. The Persians are reasonably good overlords. The Persians don't care really who you worship. They don't care really how your culture functions. Obey the few laws the king gives. Pay your taxes, send men when we call for them, and give us the symbolic submission of earth and water from your land. If you do these things, you will live in peace within the Persian Empire. They're much better overlords than a lot of ancient and modern people. But the Greeks don't like being muzzled. They don't like their free speech being messed with by the government. They don't like not being able to go to the agora and make fun of the satrap or even of the Shahanshah, the high king, the great king. So the Greeks rebel. The Athenians send aid to the Greek rebels. The Greek rebels lose. And Athens is now in the crosshairs of the Persian Empire. Greece is now in the crosshairs of the Persian Empire. And the first definitive struggle of Western civilization is, can a small nation of free men from the West defeat the world empire? Defeat the slaves of many nations sent against Greece like the surf against a sandcastle as the tide comes in. And at battles like Marathon in 490 BC, the Athenians break all the rules of warfare and they baffle the Persians and they defeat them. After the battle, the Persians are going to fake the Athenians out. The Persians have learned that the peace party in Athens has exacted a promise that if the Persian army shows up outside of Athens before the Athenian army is able to return, Athens will surrender, so it won't be destroyed. The Persians learn of this. So they send their fleet as quickly as possible around the Attic Peninsula to bluff the Greeks, the Athenians, into surrendering. The army can't get back in time. It just fought a battle. It's still mopping up. But there's an Olympic runner, a courier named Phidippides. And Phidippides is given a job, run the 27 miles over hill and over stream from Marathon battlefield to Athens and tell the Athenians, we have triumphed, don't surrender. And Phidippides runs with the hope of having wine, women, and song. the hope of being a victorious warrior, the hope of living to see the peace, and the fear that he'll die on the way. And he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. And we know he doesn't stop because he crosses the last hill, sees the Persians marching up, sees the Athenians getting ready to open their gates to them, and shouts to the walls, "Don't surrender! We have triumphed!" And he dies of a heart attack right there. So he literally runs his heart out. But because his message arrives, they don't open the gates, and Athens prevails. Without Athens prevailing, without that one man running his heart out, literally his heart out, Western civilization would have been stillborn. It would have been killed before it even became itself. So the next time some communist tries telling you that individuals don't matter in history, that it's all about socioeconomic forces, impersonal forces, you bring up Pheidippides. And there are others, Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, other people whose personal choices changed the entire history of the world. 10 years later, the Persians come back. Leonidas holds them at the hot gates of Thermopylae, and the Athenian fleet destroys the Persian fleet as it's trying to go through narrow waters to get control of the seas to capture the Athenians hiding out on a nearby island, Salamis. All morning, Xerxes himself, great king of the Persians, watches squadron after squadron after squadron of his ships go in, and like a pizza fighting a human mouth, get destroyed and consumed and destroyed and consumed. And after watching hours and hours and hours of this, Xerxes himself, who burned Athens, who wanted to defeat the Athenians, who wanted to break the power of the Greeks, stands up, stock still, looking into the middle distance, 1,000-yard stare, turns on his heel, goes back into his tent, and nobody can talk to him for the next few hours. When he comes back out, he says, "Half of the army is coming back to Persia with me starting tomorrow." His will to fight was broken. One man summoned the nations of the world to fight Greece, and one man's will was broken with the destruction of his navy, with the futility of it all, so he goes back. And the next year, 479 BC, the Greeks defeat the remaining Persians at Plataea, and the Persian Empire is not going to capture Greece. In fact, the Persian Empire is going to be conquered by Greeks under Macedonian command. A couple of hundred years later, a teenager named Alexander the Great wants to avenge his father's assassination, paid for by Persian gold, he claims. What he's really doing is keeping the Greeks unified. The Greeks are so fractious. They argue about everything. They can't get along. So Alexander and his dad Philip understood, you got to unite the Greeks against a common enemy. It's like humanity. We're never going to have a united earth, not unless it's a slave society, not until aliens show up. When we encounter aliens, then we'll unify, because then there'll be a greater difference between us and the aliens, and the differences between us won't seem like much. But until that happens, I don't expect to see a unified planet Earth. I don't expect to see a human empire and I wouldn't want to. I really wouldn't, because it would be run by bureaucrats, probably, and I hate being run by bureaucrats. Anyway, so Alexander the Great conquers Persia, and Persia is blended with Greece in a cultural movement called Hellenism. So Greek ideas percolate into Persian society. And for the next 1,000 years, the Persians are not really Persians anymore. They're Persians and Greeks. They still fight the Greeks, and then they fight the Romans, and they have their own society. But some ideas of the West leaven Persia like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's got a little chocolate, it's got a little peanut butter. Hellenism is a blend of European and Asian culture. Christianity is a Hellenistic religion. You have Judaism, which comes out of West Asia, and you have Greek thought. The New Testament is written in Greek. Talitha Kumi is one of the few Aramaic phrases, a direct quote of Jesus Christ from the New Testament. New Testament's largely in Greek. Paul goes to the Greek world and converts it. So the blending of East and West happens to Persia as well as the Greek and Roman world. But something changes. In the 600s AD, 1400 years ago, in a caravan crossroads town in northwestern Arabia, Mecca, a man named Muhammad has an Abrahamic moment. He comes home and says, the most amazing thing happened to me today. What? God spoke to me. Right. Was it the goddess of love? Was it the god of gambling? Which god was it? Was it the god of dark secrets? And Muhammad, like Abraham, said, no. The God, the only God, the one true God spoke to me. Right. So Muhammad believes that he is having the words of God. God whispers in the universal language to the Archangel Gabriel. The Archangel Gabriel whispers in Arabic of Muhammad's time into Muhammad's ear, and Muhammad writes the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Now, people don't want to hear it. There are a few followers in Mecca, but largely Muhammad is considered to be an obnoxious crank, and they're going to kill him. They're going to lynch him. So I have the date on my sheet there. On September the 24th, in the year of our Lord 622, Muhammad has to flee Mecca in an event called the Hejira. Muhammad flees Mecca. Crowds hunt him. They're going to kill him if they can. They hunt his group in the desert because the Meccans think that Muhammad threatens their business. See, like every good truck stop, like every good tourist town, they have a tourist trap. It's called the Kaaba. It is a chamber where all the gods have their summer homes from everywhere in the world. So if it were today, if you were driving anywhere near Mecca, you'd stop and you'd go to the Kaaba and you get a t-shirt saying, I went to the Kaaba and all I got was a stupid t-shirt. And Muhammad's idea of one God, aside from being tiresome and obnoxious, and he just won't shut up about it, is something that threatens the Kaaba. So, Muhammad flees north to a city called Medina. And in the course of this, in Mecca, Muhammad had been married to an old widow who had lots of money. Her former husband, the husband that died, had caravans, and her name was Khadijah. And they had a daughter. But when Muhammad gets to Medina, he makes an alliance with a powerful guy named Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr has a child, a daughter, named Aisha. I think she's about 8. They get married. Now, I can only hope, in my Christian sense of that poor girl's well-being, that they wait to consummate the marriage until she's a bit older than 8. But it is true that the Prophet of Islam marries an 8-year-old girl to cement a marriage alliance with Abu Bakr. Muhammad's idea of God is like Judaism in the sense that it's rules-based, it's rules-oriented. Christianity tends to be rooted in grace. The epistles of Paul talk a lot about the grace of God. They talk about the end of the law, or at least the transformation of the law into the new covenant. Not in Islam. So in Islam, you have the Salah, you find Mecca, and you pray 6 times a day facing Mecca. And you have halal, which is Islamic dietary law, like Islamic kosher. And you've got a number of other rules that you've got to follow. So you can tell whether somebody's faithful or not just by looking at them. In Christianity, there are debates over what is meant in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are all synoptic. They tell the same stories differently. And then there's the Gospel of John, which tells different stories about Christ. Christ did not write a single word physically as a human being of the New Testament. He inspired it, but the New Testament was written by men. And it was written in a language Jesus didn't speak normally. It was written in Greek. So every believing Christian of good faith can argue about what they believe that a certain passage in the New Testament means, because they have to interpret it. You cannot help but interpret a document like the Holy Bible, New Testament, because of these things. It is translated. It was written decades later. It is the inspired word of God. What is meant by give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's? And we can debate about that. Some people believe that you give the government your everything. That's not Christian. The Christian tradition is there's a higher law than the Caesar's law. In any event, In Islam, the Quran, the only Quran, is in Arabic, word for word, written by Muhammad. There is no interpretation. There is no room for figuring out what is really meant by this or that. The Quran is pretty darn explicit. And if you ever wonder why there's a tension between the Islamic world and the modern West, it's because if you ask, what would Muhammad do, WWMD, well, WMD, it is pretty darn clear what Muhammad would do would be to act like a medieval Arab. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, an escapee from Somalia, a great woman who has written about Islam, talks about Islam at a point very similar to where Christianity was in the Protestant Reformation. Islam was at the center of a society. Islam was involved in everything everyone did. And for better or worse, Martin Luther and John Calvin broke that unity within Christendom. And so we have many denominations. We have many different types of Christianity. And in general, this division of Christianity has served us, in that if you have a vision that you believe is the pure version of Christianity, the government's probably not going to arrest you and put you on trial for it. But in Islam, the government probably will. In Iran, as in any Islamic country, everything is measured against the Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad. And if you are doing something that is not in that wheelhouse, you are violating Muhammad's and God's revelation. You see, God spoke to the Jews, but they confused the law with God's will. Strike one! And God sent Jesus Christ, the prophet, to correct that. But Christians confused it from an Islamic point of view and made Jesus into God. Strike two! All Muslims believe that their revelation is the most recent and the most true, and Jews and Christians are poor, deluded people who just can't accept the final revelation of God. But that revelation locks society in a 7th century Arab model, with slavery, with the roles between men and women, with the roles between wealthy and poor, with all of that. So if you want to be a Muslim and modernize your society, you are up against headwinds that are really mighty. In fact, only one society on earth has done it successfully, and they're no longer around. After World War I, the general that saved Turkey from the British invasion at Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal, becomes the father of his country. And in the 1920s, Kemal takes a new name, Ataturk, father of all the Turks. Kemal Ataturk makes Turkey a modern European society where there is a distance between church and state, where women don't have to wear the hijab or the burqa, where people can vote, where their votes count. And from the 1920s under Ataturk until the 1990s, when Erdogan, their current dictator, took over, Turkey was the successful model of Islam in the modern world. Now we shift, and I have to for time, we shift to the Pahlavis. The Pahlavis are the family of the Shah of Iran. And the Pahlavis are not long-term royalty. Reza Shah, who becomes Khan of Iran in the 1920s, about the same time as Ataturk, is a bullet-head Cossack general. He's not a great thinker, but the Russians trust him, and the Russians rule northern Iran, and the British trust him, and the British rule southern Iran. So they give Iran to Reza Khan, later Reza Shah. And the Pahlavis admire Ataturk, and they try to follow his vision. In the late 1930s, early 1940s, it becomes clear that Reza Shah is a great admirer of the Austrian corporal with the Charlie Chaplin mustache. Like Hitler, Reza came from nothing. He was a self-made man. So it looked like the Shah of Iran would tilt Iran towards the Nazis in World War II. So the Soviets and British conquer Iran and put his son on the throne. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is put on the throne in the early 1940s, and he is going to be a willing cooperator with the British particularly to make sure that oil flows to the Royal Navy and oil flows to the rest of the world. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was threatened in the early 1950s by a prime minister named Mossadegh, an Iranian socialist with tendencies that are pro-Moscow and who wanted to nationalize their oil industry. Our CIA, under Kermit Roosevelt, a descendant of Theodore Roosevelt, got rid of Mossadegh in one of the CIA's more public coups, and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi therefore owed his throne not only to the British, but to the American CIA. Now, what the Shah does, what Mohammad Reza Pahlavi does that's special, is called the White Revolution. In the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, he tries to do in Iran what Ataturk did in Turkey: establish a modern Islamic state, and it works. In that time, an Islamic middle class in Iran is built up. A set of suburbs with swimming pools are built. They're Persian. Persian Muslims are living like modern Americans or Brits in many, many respects. This white revolution is what caused the Shah's fall. His success caused the Shah's fall. You all know that our Democrat friends don't make much of a fuss about what we do unless we're winning. Only when we're winning do they take action against us, do they speak against us. Well, the Shah was winning. He was winning the Iranian people into the modern world. There were Soviet agents under the Iranian Tudeh or Communist Party, but the real threat was from a guy named the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who lived in Paris. And Khomeini was a fundamentalist. He was an Islamist. He was one of the first open Islamists. And what Khomeini said is Iran is becoming a twisted, materialistic, sexualized Western cesspool. And a lot of Iranians from the rural areas go with him. And a lot of the clerics who feel that the Shah has marginalized them go with him. Now, this could have been weathered. But our president, James Earl Carter, in his morality-driven foreign policy, decided that the Shah was too authoritarian. He had a secret police called Savak, and Savak captured people and tortured them, and that is so un-American. It's typical of every Middle Eastern society outside of Israel, but Carter didn't like the Shah. He thought he was too nasty. So Carter withdrew American support. In early 1979, the Shah of Iran leaves Iran and his government falls, and a new government comes in. Will it be moral like Jimmy Carter expected and hoped for? No, it's the Islamic Republic of Iran, the same terrorist millenarians who we deal with today. Could I have time to know how much more time I have? Because I don't want to waste your time.
You have 12 minutes.
12 minutes. Yeah. Got it. Good. So, since 1979, we've been dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran, a theocracy. There's a government, but the government is like the government of China. The army is like the army of China. People's Republic of China's army doesn't work for the government. It works for the Communist Party. The military of China is a militia to the Communist Party of China. In Iran, there's a government, but they're functionaries. The real power is the Ayatollah Khomeini and his successor, the Ayatollah Khamenei, the mullahs, the basic priests who run the theocracy, and the government does their bidding. This government is responsible for the Iran hostage crisis. That was my political awakening, by the way. I had paid attention, I had noticed things from the 1972 election on, but I started watching the news constantly when they took our people in November of 1979. And for 444 days, America was held hostage. President Carter, after defunding the military systematically for 3 years, tried a military rescue about halfway through the time that the hostages were held, but it failed. And it failed because his military spending didn't allow for enough training. didn't allow for enough preparation for a complicated event like going in and rescuing the hostages. So Desert One happens, and American aircraft collide, and it's humiliating. Carter loses the 1980 election because he is weak in relation to the Iran hostage crisis. And our guy, Ronald Wilson Reagan, becomes president because he calls the Iranians savages and says very clearly, both before and after he is president-elect, that he will use the full power of the United States against these savages if they don't let our people go. Within an hour of taking the oath of office, Reagan and the world were informed that all of our hostages were on a plane leaving Iranian airspace. And at that point, most Americans thought, it's done, it's over, we won. Not really. The Iranians chose to let go. It was a monkey trap. You have a piece of fruit in a jar. The arm can fit in, but when they hold the fruit, they can't get it out of the jar. The Iranians let go of the fruit and pulled their hand out of the jar. The same government that did the hostage crisis is still in power today. Some of the same people are still in power. In fact, the Iranian president 20 years ago, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was one of the students that took the hostages. He was one of the terrorists personally involved in keeping Americans prisoner. And the Iranians have used their power and wealth and money to become the world's chief sponsor of terror. I don't have the time to go into the details, but just as China is involved in any trouble around the world because they are happy to use the Russians or the Iranians or the North Koreans or the Pakistanis or anyone else as cat's paws to keep us off balance so that at some point they can go for Taiwan, at some point, if you're dealing with anything involving Islamism or terror, the Iranians are involved. Now, there's a division in Islam, two denominations, Shiite and Sunni. I wasn't able to go into that, but leave it to be said that just as people in the 1500s hated the damn papists if they were Protestants and hated the damn heretics if they were Catholics, and that hatred was worth fighting over, the Sunni and Shiite denominations of Islam hate each other. One of the things that has kept the Islamic world down is they snipe at each other and they drag each other down. But the Iranians have overcome that. And the Iranians are involved in funding every major terrorist group, from Boko Haram in North Africa to the Houthis, to Hamas and Hezbollah, and a bunch of others that probably nobody here has ever heard of, including me. The Iranians have also said, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said on several occasions, it is our destiny. The 12th Imam walks the world. The 12th Imam is the Islamic Messiah. The Sunni Muslims call him the Mahdi. They believe that their Messiah is walking the earth, and that their duty as devout Muslims is to bring about the day of Hak, Judgment Day, to initiate the apocalypse, to initiate doomsday. They believe that this is their destiny. And he said on several occasions, and so have other Iranian leaders, we will purge Israel with God's holy fire. Now, the Soviets had nuclear weapons stolen from our research. Well, they're communists. At least they realize that in this earth, that's where they keep all their stuff. Their only one and only life is here. And the Soviets didn't initiate doomsday even when they fell in the early 1990s. The North Koreans, the Chinese got the nukes next, and the Chinese communists also do not want to destroy the world. They want to use the nuclear weapons to reset the balance of power, maybe, but not to destroy the world. The North Koreans are bat-nuts crazy, but the Chinese have some control over them. The Pakistanis get nukes from the North Koreans, who got them from the Chinese, who got them from the Russians, and the Pakistanis have some Islamists in their group, and the Pakistanis have been the ones trying to give the Iranians nuclear weapons. So last week, President Trump, Saturday, decided that the threat of Iran getting nuclear weapons was simply too great. Following the lead of Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who had launched a series of attacks on Iran from the air and from the ground almost a week before, the heart of the Iranian nuclear program, which was in atom bomb-proof shelters, was bombed by American bunker buster bombs. And because Unlike the communists, the Iranians believed that it was their holy duty, that it was their destiny to use nuclear weapons, weapons they never could have developed on their own. A medieval millenarian mindset. Purge the world with cleansing fire, and you have the 1,000 years of peace, and we can make it happen. Christians who are focused on apocalyptic things don't necessarily believe that it's their job to make God's timetable happen. There is a feeling of two minds about Judgment Day, and there should be, because none of us is perfect, and none of us can stand up under God's scrutiny unless he's feeling merciful. Jesus indicates he's sort of a merciful God, so we hope. But these Iranian leaders, they believe they're pure. They believe they're elect. They believe that they are destined to have paradise in this world and the next. So their nuclear program, we think, was finally destroyed over the weekend. And then the Iranians did something I didn't expect. They did a set of symbolic attacks on the United States, on American bases in the Middle East, where they warned us where they were going to shoot their missiles so that we didn't lose people. This is not the activity of foaming at the mouth, rabid revolutionaries. And they are willing to, at least they seem to be willing to, follow a ceasefire agreement that was just arranged with Israel. And that was what I went to bed to last night. I couldn't imagine, but the Iranians and the Israelis had agreed to a ceasefire. But of course I woke up this morning and both the Iranians and the Israelis violated it, and we'll see what happens. But still, it is hopeful. I have thrown so much your way. I didn't touch. I did about a third of the notes, but the goal was to have a coherent narrative. What I'd ask you to walk away with is this: they don't think like us. They're not Americans under the skin. War and peace is not an either-or state. They're always at war in some respect or other. You do not expect them to negotiate in good faith for a win-win solution. That's not part of their tradition. And they have tried to get nuclear weapons with the intent of using them at the earliest opportunity. And if we've stopped them, and if we've brought a moment of reconsideration, which I doubt, to the Islamic regime, then we are as lucky as we were when the Soviet Empire crumbled without World War III. I don't know if we're going to be that lucky again. We'll see. Do you have any questions in the remaining time? Yes?
When did Persia become Iran?
It was in the 1930s. The government of Iran had been called Persia in the League of Nations and in all things. And Reza Shah, the one who admired Hitler, decided that we want to be called what we call ourselves. We call ourselves land of the Aryans, Iran, and that's when diplomacy changed. Also, in World War II, Churchill said the British will use Persia because we don't want to confuse Iran and Iraq. As it is, Persia or Britain, when they were doing Ireland and Iceland, would always follow with a parenthesized R, Ireland R or Iceland C, to make sure that there was no mistake. This deals with Iceland, this deals with Ireland, because the national names were so similar. They used Persia to avoid that with Iran and Iraq. Other questions? Sir?
So I work with a physician in St. Louis who's Muslim, and her whole family, and they meet a lot of Muslim people. And she seemed to say that there's a whole other world of Muslims that has a very, let's get along and be nice and follow forgiveness and one God, all children of that one God, which is different from the radical us or nothing.
You're right.
Is that
Yes,
right?
that exists, but it's a minoritarian view. It's like the Japanese that were willing to surrender in 1945. There was a group of Japanese that wanted to surrender in 1945, but it took not one but two atom bombs to get the emperor to agree. In Christianity, you could have a strapping young man in armor with a cross on his tabard saying, "I'm going to go fight in the Crusades." And a little old lady could walk up and say, "Sonny, what would Jesus do?" Well, there weren't many times Jesus put on some armor and went to kill enemies of the faith. So in Christianity, the personal example of Jesus tends towards peace and moderation. The most violent he got was horsewhipping some money changers in the court of the Gentiles of the temple. But in Islam, if you're a man of peace, if you're one of the Sufi mystics, or if you're one of the Muslim peace-oriented people that exist today, little old lady can walk up and say, "Sonny, what would Muhammad do?" And the personal example of Muhammad is not a moderate. He's a war leader, he's a general, a king, a judge. He did all the things Jesus refused to do. And so in Islam, while there are peaceful tendencies, and while those tendencies, thank God, come out a lot when you have Muslims transplanted to the West, in the Middle East, the hardcore is still this medieval conquer by the sword mentality. And yeah, they both exist, but I would argue in terms of Islamic politics back there in the old world, the peace-oriented group. I mean, Anwar Sadat was a British general, an Egyptian general. He made peace with the Israelis in the Camp David Accords, and Islamists shot him 2 years later, and they were his own bodyguards. So the king of Jordan in 1920, Abdullah, not the same Abdullah that's ruling today, he was willing to split Palestine, and Jordan was going to be the Islamic State, and he was assassinated. In this sense, Japan and the Islamic Middle East are similar. In 1930s Japan, any peace-oriented politician was liable to be assassinated by the army faction. And in the Middle East, any peace-oriented leader is liable to be overthrown or assassinated. And that's what happened to the Shah, by the way. The Shah was a very strong American ally. That's why he had F-14 Tomcats. The Shah was somebody we could trust, and he was modernizing his people. And that's what marked him for death. So it exists, and we should do what we can to encourage it. But ultimately, either Islam is going to have a reformation like we had, or Islam is going to become a death cult that threatens all of humanity and tries to hold everything in stasis in a medieval mindset. Does that make sense? Okay, sir.
Do you think this sort of business transaction type of thing that Trump's got going on with Israel and Iran, do you think that's probably, of all the ways, maybe the effective way?
I think it is, and I think the Iranian leadership has been brought to a point. If they don't play their cards very carefully, their own people will overthrow them. The Islamic Republic has never been particularly popular. They rule through fear. They have a morality police like the Gestapo that controls their own people. And right now they're weak because of what Israel and the United States did to them. The reason they're willing to have a ceasefire is they need to consolidate their power at home, or they're going to get overthrown. That is an opportunity. It's an opportunity. It is a moment of opportunity. Will the Iranian people rise up? Well, the thing is, we encourage them to rise up, and several times in the last 20 or 30 years they did, and we didn't do anything to help them. We basically let them rise up and then let them get slaughtered. We'll see what happens this time. But I think, yeah, Trump's willingness to use force, but at the same time, eagerness to negotiate creates an opportunity. Sir? And I know we got to stop.
There's not a leadership in place for them to rally around to rise up, at least to the degree that would be necessary.
Indeed, and that's a problem because their secret police is very good.
How about the Shah's son?
He's trying. I'll tell you, though, I don't know if there is a good government that takes over in Iran. It might be a republic, not an Islamic republic. It's possible they might want the Pahlavis back. It's possible. I like the Shah and his family, but they blew it. And will the Iranians want to exchange the Islamic Republic for the Pahlavis, or will they want something new? My gut says they'll want something new, but what do I know? Do we have time for one more question or no? Okay. Was there? Okay, sir. I'll be brief.
Does Iran seem to be more isolated in their extremist Islamic views because we've seen with the Abraham Accords, some of the nations coming over to exist with Israel?
Please go on.
Oh no. So where do you see that?
It is the fear of Iran that made the Abraham Accords possible. The Abraham Accords were the first Arab governments to make peace with Israel since 1978, since the Camp David Accords. The Abraham Accords were the great accomplishment of the last part of Trump's first term. And it is all because they are terrified of Iran. And so, yeah, You ally with the Saudis and with the United States and, with Israel. And it'll keep the Iranian at bay. Whether that will continue if the Iranians have a good government, I don't know. Folks, thank you so much for listening to me lather on. Thank you.